Zom 100 is an isekai, right?
What the hell are you talking about?
I've been thinking a lot about like it as a take on zombie media from a Japanese perspective. Before, zombies were kind of like a metaphor for, consumerism or manifestations of like our fear of like, potheads, meth heads, whatever. Zombies were like originally like a myth that were told amongst like the Haitian slaves. It's not too much of a stretch to say that the zombie was like a projection of like the relentless misery of slavery. Salaryman can be described more as like, corporate slaves, right?
There's one thing that like Zom 100 is not. It's not subtle with how it handles things. It's very clear what the point it's trying to make is, which is that Akira is basically a zombie working for this black company until the actual zombie apocalypse happens, at which point he's alive. So I can see like a connection between like slavery in the Caribbean and wage slavery and exploitation in late capitalist Japan.
It's important to keep in mind the zombies intrinsically linked to slavery, which is something that's kind of lost in modern zombie media.
Well, because you look at like what a lot of like modern zombie media is and what it sort of focuses on in terms of the apocalypse, and fundamentally what these stories are trying to do is either survive or try to recreate the society that came before the apocalypse. The point of the story is not it's a struggle to survive. They do need to survive, but it's not really ever a struggle in the story. There's some like more serious points, but those are just kind of like peppered in.
Yeah.
And they're not really trying to recreate the world that came before because in the case of our main character, the zombie apocalypse has demonstrably improved his life.
I guess that's interesting from like a Japanese like apocalypse kind of perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
It kind of reminds me of like YKK, where they kind of just accepted it's the end of the world. Obviously, like not all the characters in Zom 100 have kind of come to terms with, the end of society.
Right. It's kind of like an interesting response to something like Girls Last Tour, where Girls Last Tour is like, it has this like sort of like bittersweet angle to it, where it's a story of like all of these different people trying to find meaning in their lives, even after the world has basically fallen apart. Whereas Zom 100, it's all of these characters doing things and finding meaning in their lives because the apocalypse has happened.
I guess Girls Last Tour, it's kind of melancholic in a way of like these characters have never experienced the old world, where Zom 100 is melancholic in a way of like these characters were suffering in the old world and now they are thriving.
You kind of just have to ignore everyone else that got turned into a zombie.
I guess that's interesting about that is like they don't necessarily do that, but they aren't contextualizing the other characters as zombies in a way that like other zombie media does.
Yeah.
Where like they're seen as like obstacles that have to be overcome to survive. Whereas like in this, they're not really presented that way. They still kind of maintain like a little bit of a semblance of dignity for their humanity. It's more painted like they're all victims of this new structure, much like they're all victims of like late stage kind of capitalist tendencies. Zom 100 specifically is like an interesting case study to me. In a way, zombie media kind of reminds me of like isekai in Japan.
Well, they're both about escapism.
Yes.
The difference is that, so in isekai, you are literally escaping the world by going to another world. Whereas Zom 100, you are escaping the world by the world just ending.
It's funny because like both of them are direct kind of response to like capitalism. And they both kind of like had that weird kind of element of like oversaturation in a way.
Zombie media less now, but definitely like in the 2010s was definitely like the zeitgeist with stuff like The Walking Dead especially.
Yeah. I guess at the risk of like overgeneralizing, it is interesting to look at it as like the differences in like our two cultures.
Mm-hmm.
Zombie media is generally about like that catharsis of tearing down the system that's kind of wronged you in your life. Just indulging in everything that they wanted to do that they couldn't because they were constrained monetarily.
The closest analog I'd say to like Zom 100 that I could think of would probably be like Zombieland.
Isekai though is instead more about just removing yourself from the system and not actually affecting the people around you.
It's the polite Japanese way of doing things.
Right. It kind of just contrasts like the differences in our two cultures and how we kind of react to like similar sort of stimuli in a like broad sense. And like the media that we've produced as a result being isekai and like zombies in a way. But I guess it begs the question of what is the connection of like Zom 100 to isekai?
Yeah, you better have a good answer for this.
What is isekai?
It is a story
About a character
or a group of characters that has been transported to some mechanism to another world.
On a base conceptual level, isekai is just simply another world, right?
that is the literal definition of the word.
Obviously, that's not how we recognize it as a term today. But I think it was Kaichiro Morikawa that kind of likened, Shibuya and Akihabara and their stores that were kind of built in a way to kind of make you lose track of time.
Well, they're all
and-
very like closed off from the outside world. There are no windows in them, and the walls are all kind of like painted as if it is like a literal other world. In the case of things like maid cafes,
It didn't fit like perfectly, right? But Shinjuku is kind of known for like Kabukicho's bustling kind of nightlife scene, which I guess in a way that's more relevant to Zom 100 specifically. You have host clubs that kind of go with that nightlife scene. They're kind of like other worlds in a way where they can kind of put their lives on the back burner, kind of forget about things for a while. But in Zom 100, it's not Shinjuku that's the other world, right?
it's the entire world.
Everything.
It's all of Japan.
But yeah, Akira was essentially reborn. He was a zombie in the corporate world, like you said, and then the world goes to shit. And then
And he remembers that there's color in the world.
basically reincarnated, right?
Not really.
It's even like kind of directly reinforced in the show where like Akira's friend is like literally making a joke about being reborn after embracing this new identity as a comedian. But yeah, I don't know. Is it an isekai?
No,
No, absolutely not.
you've been lied to.